Hello, welcome to the first of our three-part series, Elevate Your Seder, um, taught by me, Rav Hodi and Rav Ari. Tonight's topic that we're going to learn is about Karpas. Maybe I'm late to the party, but I feel like over the last few years, maybe even like decade, Karpas has gotten a lot fancier and more fun than it used to be. I see some people nodding along, so that's good to know. I'm not alone. And I think that it is fun, and the Seder is long, and especially if you have young people, but even if you are not a young person or don't have young people, you need a little something to get you through. And so I understand it. However, I think there is something very special about parsley, that like Dafka parsley as karpas. I would say it's probably the least favorite. It's like it was the least favorite of my more traditional karpas, and now there are so many fun options. So what I thought we would do is both embrace the new and fun. So I welcome any suggestions that people have about karpas, new or old. Please feel free to shout them out or add them to the chat. And also to like think about the root of the Karpas ritual and why we do it. I'm going to share my screen now to say, oh, you know what? Hold on. I'm just going to fix it so it's in presentation mode, and then I'm going to share my screen. Um, to say that it's sort of a funny thing to say the rit like the to honor the ritual tradition of. Oh, maybe I'm going to have to do it after I. Whoops, sorry, technical difficulty. Um, because Karpas is not spelled out in the Mishnah, right? We get the framework or the structure for our Seder through the Mishnayot of Psachim. Okay, here we go. Now let's see if we can make it into a presentation. Da, 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 there we go. Okay, so this is all we get about Karpas. The Mishnah says, Heviu lifanav. So whoever is leading the Seder, the helpers bring before him vegetables. That's what we have to understand, right? Just a reminder, the bolded words are the direct translation of the Hebrew. But there's a lot of helpful things drawn from Rashi and other commentaries. So the helpers bring before him vegetables. Mivatel b'chazeret ad shemagia leparpera tapat. And the leader of the Seder dips the chazeret, which is like a lettuce, into water or vinegar to taste before he reaches the bread. Um, which is we're meant to understand the maror, which is eaten at the dessert of the bread, which is the maror, which is eaten after the matzah. So what is going on here is we're talking really about maror or maybe matzah, but we're talking about this little appetizer that happens beforehand, some kind of vegetable dipped into water or vinegar. Again, none of that is totally clear from the Mishnah itself, right? This is what we've come to understand the Mishnah is talking about. And then they go on to bring him matzah and the maror and charoset and two cooked dishes, right? And we go on with the meal. And this is the only mention of karpas, not even called karpas, in the Mishnah. And in the Gemara, it's a fascinating discussion, but not the topic of what I wanted to talk about tonight, which is the question of whether mitzvot require kavanah. When you eat your lettuce, your appetizer, and you say your borei pri ha'adamah, does that count for your maror? What if you didn't realize you were going to have maror, or you forgot that maror has a borei pri ha'adamah? Do you have to say a second borei pri ha'adamah when you eat your maror? But that is the only conversation about the karpas in the Gemara itself, right? So meaning this whole thing, which I've just said is imbued with so much meaning and is so beautiful, is understated, maybe is the way to put it in the Mishnah and then in the Gemara. But it has become, I think, a very integral part of the ritual of our Seder, which looks very different from the Mishnaic Seder on many levels. Okay, so this is our basis. This is where we're starting from. Some kind of vegetable dipped into something salty before you get to the main events of the Seder. So there is a question, a really interesting question that
It doesn't say salty.
sorry,
It doesn't say salty. It says
it's a
water
great.
or vinegar.
Oh, sorry. You are correct. We decide that it is salt water. Vinegar is, I think, the sour, maybe bitter is what I should have said, into something bitter. So we add. Um, we add salt to water instead of using vinegar. And again, actually, water or vinegar is not even written into the Mishnah itself. It's our understanding. So it's like the layers. We know that we mitabel, right? We dip our chazeret in something, and the rabbis come to understand that as something that's bitter. And we'll sort of circle back to why we dip it in something bitter in a few minutes. But that's a great point. It does not say salty. Um, okay. Thinking about what were the customs of what the karpas was, what was this vegetable that was brought? Rav Gordimer, the Magen Avraham, talks about the karpas and talks specifically about the parsley. But I got distracted by Bonnie's note. Bonnie, can you explain what you mean? What does it mean that vinegar can fool you to t your taste buds?
Um, if you, for instance, for salt restrictive diets, if
Oh,
you add a little vinegar, it fools the taste buds into it feels salty. It tastes salty. So vinegar does not always taste entirely bitter. It can taste somewhat salty.
interesting. Okay, so some sort of salty or bitter flavor, and maybe we substitute salt water for vinegar because they taste the same. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you. Um, so the first thing the Magen Avraham does is he helps us understand why Karpas, and he gives us the Maharil, who teaches us that we take Karpas because it is a notarikon, an acronym for the words Sameach Perech, which is 60, Sameach, and it was the Shishim Ribua Avdu Avodat Perach, that the parsley is supposed to be bitter on some level, right? So maybe you don't have to dip it in something bitter. The parsley itself is meant to be bitter because it's meant to remind us of all of the slave labor that we had to provide in Egypt. Um, but he says, right? He says it's kind of surprising to him because there's the safek im mutar likach et parzlan mipnei shehu tov yoter mevushal mechai. So this is an interesting bracha B question, which is what bracha do you say on parsley? You might assume it's borei pri ha'adama. It clearly comes from the ground, but there's a principle in the Shulchan Aruch that if a food tastes better cooked than it does raw, that then it is you might not say bori pri ha'adama, right? Ein mevarchin alav bori pri ha'adama. And he even gives us the seif so we can look it up ourselves. But you would say a shahakol is the answer, right? So there are certain vegetables, you might be able to think of some that we don't eat raw at all. We only eat cooked. And so maybe we don't say a bori pri ha'adama, but rather a shahakol, right? And he says, "Ani tameh lama nehegei b'midnotenu likuach parsley." Right? Why do we take this? If it's clear, I'm shocked as to why this is the practice in our countries to use parsley. And I apologize. This is a crowdsourced translation of this. Let's skip that complicated sentence. And dafka kashe'in achlin klal chayin mevarech shahakol. If no one ever eats it raw, that's when you say a shahakol bracha. Aval kashin achlin chayin afal pisha tovin yoter mevushalim mikol makom mevarech kashe'in chayin borei pi ha'adama. Right, so he says, so listen, maybe parsley falls under an exception, which is that as long as some people eat it raw, even if you think it might be better cooked, you can say obore pri ha'adama. Now, I think this is an interesting question also because how often does someone eat parsley by itself? Right? Normally you eat parsley as like a accessory, right? to a meal. And so you would say the bracha of the meal as opposed to the bracha over the parsley itself. So you're sort of saved from this conundrum by and large, is what I would say. Oh, Myra, yes, please.
I was just wondering, it talks about, these in these countries they use parsley. Which countries used parsley? Do we know?
That's a great question, right? The Magen Avraham is Poland, I think maybe 16th century. Um, right. Why do you ask? Do you have a different
Well, I mean, go back enough. I come from three-quarters Polish stock. I mean, we were raised on potato, pieces of potato, and supposedly because who had green stuff growing in March, April in Poland.
Yeah.
And then we sort of realized, oh, we can have green stuff. And then unfortunately, it ended up being celery, which nobody really preferred to potato, but we never had parsley. But then again, my at least my mother, I mean, my parents were born in Canada, so I don't know if we lost the parsley somewhere or if it just wasn't that widespread.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's an excellent point. And even more excellent because what bracha might you say on a potato, given what we just learned?
I guess we should have said shahakol.
Right? It's kind of an interesting point that if we're dafka picking vegetables that we're supposed to say ha'adama on, parsley and potatoes sort of share that common trait of um, being a shahakol adama, perhaps.
I don't
Uh,
even know what cooked parsley is, actually. I know parsley is a garnish. I don't know what cooked parsley is.
That is what Rabbi Eliakim said too, right? It's a garnish. Like we don't even always eat it at all, right? It's like it dresses up your plate. Um, it is an interesting question, and it is kind of bitter, raw. I think sometimes it's cooked in soups. That's like kind of how I think of parsley as cooked, is like you put it in your soup sort of towards the
You
end.
can use it as part of your herbal bouquet within foods.
Yeah. You know what? I sometimes put parsley, like I make a green fish on Pesach that has like chives and basil and parsley and sort of whatever green things you have, and you sort of mix them together and you put them on the fish and you cook it. It's kind of bitter all the time. It seems like you have many friends, right? Bobby also says, right, that the Winter families use potatoes going back to Poland. What's
My
interesting,
family was from Poland and we ate fish carrots.
what is, oh, like made with the gefilte fish?
Yep.
Ooh, I love that
Oh,
idea.
cooked.
Cooked,
Also cooked.
absolutely. The carrot, yes, and we said Adama.
Well, cooked, but carrots is a great example, a counterbalance, right? Because even when it's cooked, I think all of us would agree eating a carrot plain is not the same as eating a potato plain. Uncooked is what I mean by plain, right? So carrots, you would definitely say ha'adama on even when they're cooked. And what I like about that is that those carrots are very sweet, right? So I think this idea of parsley as like a reminder of hard work is not appealing to me, is maybe how I would say it. And I love that idea of gefilte fish carrots because I think that that the contrast of the sweet and the salty is really interesting, and we'll come back to that. Chabad uses onion. That's another interesting shahakol adama machloket, right? Um, my father's family used potato, um, and my mother's family used radishes, which are also sort of like have a spicy flavor to them. What's interesting is that the Magen Avraham ends by supposing that perhaps we used parsley because you could not find other green vegetables at that time of year. So maybe parsley was grown on windowsills even in Poland. I don't know. Um, One thing that I think is interesting is that they say that parsley germinates between Tu B'Shvat and Pesach, right? Some people have a custom. I looked very hard for a source for this custom, and I don't know it, to plant parsley on Tu B'Shvat and then to use that at their Seder. And apparently, it's one of the faster germinating seeds. So maybe there was a practice of greenhousing. I certainly am not an expert. Celery is another popular one. What other ones? Let's see. This is where let's see if it'll work. Oh, there we go. There comes our parsley. Celery, we've mentioned. Potatoes, radishes. Anything else? I have two more fun ones on my deck of tricks here. Any new customs anyone uses? Any
Onion,
bird? Yeah, Damas?
onion.
Onion. I don't have onion on my,
I
but
don't
that's a good
use
one.
I don't use it, but Chabad traditionally puts either onion or potato or both.
Any other fun ones?
Banana.
It's interesting
Banana.
that I understand the Geras don't eat onions on Pesach altogether.
Is that right?
My
Because they're worried
grandfather
about
was
some
a
kind of
Gera person
contamination?
and we ate onions, Yankee. That's not good.
I heard that the Gera Rebbe got sick eating onions, and after that, his followers didn't eat them.
Interesting.
My grandfather was Gera Chassid and my grandmother put onions in the filter fish. Absolutely.
She was bold. So there are tons of really interesting food hang-ups around Pesach for sure. I wonder if there was somewhere where onions were like grown in a field adjacent to wheat, and there was maybe some kind of worry. Bananas are one. The other that I was thinking of is pineapple. These are both Borei Pri Ha'adama. We think of them as fruits, or they are fruits, classified as fruits, but they grow out of the ground, not from a tree. Um,
How about an orange on the
and
Seder plate?
An orange, an orange may belong on the Seder plate, but it is Bari Pri Ha'etz, so it would not qualify for this mitzvah. Yes, potatoes I think are a fascinating one, Rabbi Eliakim, because they seem to be so clearly a shahakol on some level. I will say one of the more interesting, really fun karpasses I've heard of is French fries. Potatoes, like cooked as French fries dipped in ketchup, which is like vinegary and salty. It's like an interesting play of it. Um, to me, it feels very not savory. When my cousins brought pineapple, I was like, pineapple, that's not karpas. My aunt makes little tiny artichokes, which are take a long time for small children to eat, so that's kind of nice. But they're not right for many of us. We're very careful not to eat more than where we would have to say separate bracha achrona. But there are certainly lots of them, and I think that the Magen Avraham is like circling some kind of weird thing about parsley. Like maybe it doesn't really fit, maybe it does fit because it's this idea of parach. I want us to conclude with the idea of parsley and to just take a mild detour into the dipping. Oop, I don't know why I did
Can I
that.
just
Okay.
ask, is it the onion, like green onions or the onion bulb?
Oh, I don't know. For someone who said onion, what kind of onion was served? Also, is it raw? Melissa, do you know?
I was driving, so I had to pull over
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
just to access the microphone again. Um, it was raw onion, and onions grow under the ground, just like potatoes. So maybe that's somehow helpful. Like
Amazing. We're
it's
gonna
not
come back to
exposed to
that.
weed or anything like that. It
Yeah.
was raw and
So
not
it's the bulb.
not green. But I have seen other, you know, not a Chabad situation. I've seen other plates of karpas that included the green onion.
Green onion is a kind of nice middle, right? It's like not quite as sharp as the bulb of the onion, and it's green.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, again, these are sort of ideas and requirements that we've put upon ourselves, right? The Mishnah just talks about vegetables. So green is like something we've decided upon, right? Looks like spring. But green onion is a nice idea. Um,
I have to add about the regular onion and the worry about its sharpness. For some, that kind of adds to the whole, like there's it's not for that symbol, but it kind of is in the theme of the whole thing. And for others, they find that when they're dipping it in the salt water, it changes the flavor of it.
hmm, interesting.
When you say orange, there's most liberal Seders have an orange on the Seder plate, not as a karpas, but as do you know about this?
Yes.
All right, then I won't say it.
I think I have seen a multitude of interesting things be put on the Seder plate for these reasons, right? Which Harry is alluding to. Again, the orange would not qualify as karpas because it's a Bori Pri Ha'etz for sure. And I think that there are, if the point of a Seder from a meta level is so that the children will question, right? So that we'll engage in conversation. I personally see nothing wrong with any number of things being put on your table. The orange
Rabbi
was for
Yael,
Kevin. Yes.
can I ask you about something that you just said a few minutes ago? It was some are careful not to eat over a certain amount because of the bracha.
Yes.
So the trend certainly has been in the last 10 years that people are serving the karpas like an appetizer, and it's a way to fill up and not be starving for the 11 o'clock meal that's coming later.
Yes.
But could you please say more about descriptively about what you were alluding to earlier?
Well, so there is like this interesting idea that we're saying the same bracha of Bori Pri Hadama on our karpas and our maror, right? And if we have to stop in the middle and say bracha achrona, a concluding bracha on like the little mini meal of appetizers that we've had, then there's a question as to whether that bracha will still apply. There's also a concept that we should be very hungry when we get to the matzah, and so we shouldn't be sort of fuller.
Mhm.
But there is certainly a difference of opinion. Rabbi Eliakim put here, right, that the Gra actually does, like Dafka say, to eat a kazait of karpas. So it's certainly
But
not
a kazayit is not very much.
correct, but less
Okay.
than kazait is even less, right?
Okay. So you're saying he goes by the original way. The way that Seder's used to be, nobody was making it an appetizer, but I never knew the reason why. And then I more recently heard that maybe 5 years ago, the last two things that you just said, but nobody in, well, I shouldn't say nobody, depends on the home. Many homes are either not aware of that or they're just not following it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have the opinion of the Gra and others to rely on if that's what you, if you would and again, like different things work for different people, right? Some kids get fed dinner and put to bed after karpas, so they don't need like a whole appetizer. Some kids are encouraged to stay up and they might need more food. They might be hungry. Some
Yeah.
people might not be able to drink 2 cups of wine before eating anything, right? And that's
Right.
certainly a mitzvah. So even a tiny, tiny cup, bear
Can I
minimum.
ask a question?
You certainly can, but Myra had her hand raised. So, Myra, and then whoever just asked.
Okay, just a quick thing is just I've been looking at, unfortunately, at the different Pesach guides, and more of them seem to be including the measurement of how much karpas you have to eat, which, as far as I mean, it was never a thing that was popular, for a long time. Then how much matzah do you have to eat, how much mara, now suddenly how much karpas, and I don't know. I think you could easily end up with too much, and then you'd have to maybe say bracha achrona. I don't know. It's
Yes,
I
the
just.
the measurements is like such a thing. I remember I'm 8 years younger than my oldest cousin, and he came back from his year in Israel with like a placemat, and he sat there and like consumed an enormous amount of matzah in like 35 seconds, and I was like, "Whoa!" Right? For me, that was like really didn't feel like embodying the mitzvah. On the other hand, I think like there is something to, right, not getting carried away in the appetizer course. I could see it all ways, but I think Will and I both had a favorite teacher at Pardes who his wife's mantra over Pesach was keep your eyes on your own plate because he was driving her crazy, saying like, "Honey, I think you need another piece of matzah and you got to do it now." And she said, "Svi, keep your eyes on your own plate. Like I don't want to be." So I think everyone sort of has to do that in their own way, like to make Pesach work for them. But yes, there are people who are very careful not to eat too much karpas and to eat enough matzah and all of those things.
Uh,
Were you the other one asking a question? Who asked a question?
yeah, the people that you've been citing are from 1800s, 1900s, and so on. There were Haggadahs much earlier than that are in extent. What do they say about
Hmm.
Karpas?
That's a
Or
great
do
question
they?
that I don't know the answer to, but I could look into it a little bit after this. My sense is that the parsley is a relatively late, right? The Magen Avraham is talking about it because it's interesting, which I think must mean that it's relatively new, even if it's, 100, 200 years old. But yes, even right from Mishnaic times on, there were Haggadahs and there were things being developed. And so I don't know. I'd have to look into it. That's a good question.
Excuse me, Rabbanit.
Yes.
I might be mistaken, but I heard this from my Rebbe when he said this to his daughter. But I think I've seen it in the Gemara. Doesn't the Gemara specify that the whole purpose for Karpas is to get the kids to start asking questions?
Yes, right. Thank you. That is a really wonderful way to transition to the next section, which is right. What do we say in the Manish Shana? What is different about tonight is that on all nights we dip one time, and tonight we dip twice. And so the karpas, maybe, right, we're going to come back to thinking about the parsley, but maybe the vegetable itself is not so important, but it's the act of dipping that is important. And I want to suggest that there are two dips that happen in our history that frame the story of exile and redemption, and that perhaps that is the purpose of thinking about dipping now. Meaning, whether you dip parsley, potato, radish, French fries, whatever, pineapple, the first dip, the dip into the salty or the vinegary or however we want to qualify that first dip, right, is a very bitter dip because the first dip is from Sefer Bereshith, where the brothers of Yosef, right, have sold Yosef, and then they decide to take his katonet, right, vikru et katonet, they take his tunic of Yosef's, vishratu seir izim, and they kill a goat, v'yit balu et katonet badam, and they dip the tunic in blood. And so of course, we should not imagine that we're dipping anything in blood, but that we sort of imagine the bitterness of that moment that kicked off our exile in many ways, right? Hard to say what would have happened if Yosef wasn't in Egypt at the time of the famine, but certainly we go down to Egypt because, if we back it up far enough, because maybe of this moment. And what's the bookend to that is that in Shemot, when we're talking about the beginning of Yetziat Mitzrayim, all of Bnei Israel, "Ulekachtem agudat ezov," they take a bunch of hyssop, tavaltem badam, and they dip it in blood, right? So like this is such a different, it's almost like taking a painful memory and turning it on its head, right? Repurposing it into something much more positive. Because here again, we're dipping into blood, but it's no longer to deceive our own family, but to actually be very articulate about who we are, right? Because it is the purpose of lining our doorposts so that the Malach HaMavet knows who to skip. So we're no longer pretending that one thing is true and the other is actually true, but we're being very transparent um, in our dipping and in our using of blood to identify ourselves as people. And so I want to share, oh gosh, I don't understand why that keeps happening. I want to share two ideas here from sort of modern, much more modern thinkers about this. I did have to put this picture of salt water because like only in the Jewish world could we, monetize salt water in such a way that it's quite expensive. This is pounds, but over $1 to spend on something that's practically free in your house. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says in his Haggadah at Karpas, so if you have his Haggadah, you'll be able to find it, that the two dippings recall these events, right? The Breshit dipping and the Shmot dipping. The Karpas itself sweet, right, which is an interesting sort of machloket with the Magen Avraham who thinks Karpas is bitter, is dipped in salt and becomes sour. And then in contrast, the maror itself bitter is dipped in the sweet charoset and has some of the bitterness removed. These two acts remind us that freedom, which is sweet, becomes sour when we use it to mistreat others. Slavery, which is bitter, is sweetened when collective suffering becomes human solidarity and thus a prelude to freedom. So I think this idea of often at the beginning of the Seder, we're like settling in, or at least in my family, that's what we're doing, right? Is like everyone's still sort of like getting their elbow room and making sure they have their wine poured and all of the, whose fork has fallen on the floor. But if we took this moment of Karpas to say, this is the beginning of this bookend with Maror, which is going to happen at the end of our storytelling, and to think about ways in which we are sometimes bitter but can sweeten ourselves, or ways in which we are sweet and sometimes become embittered, I think is a powerful bookend. And I think that Rabbi Rosner says it a little bit differently. Sorry, I can't. This is a problem with this. Okay, here we go. Rabbi Shalom Rosner says it sort of a little bit differently. He's less interested in the bookends piece of it. But he says, before we discuss the Gula, right, before we go on to Magid at the Seder, we first need to understand what brought us into exile. And I think this is like a really nice, helpful way of understanding why we spend so much time in the Magid talking about things that happen way before Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? It's because we have to understand what brings us into exile. We dip the karpas, less important which vegetable. What is important is that we understand what caused the first exile and the exile that still exists today, right? If we think about that horrible hatred between brothers, it is the hatred between Jews that we need to avoid in order to once again achieve our salvation. May we learn our lesson and unite so we can be worthy of a complete redemption, right? That these moments of dipping are so powerful because they remind us of really powerful moments within the Magid story and within the Yetziat Mitzrayim story. And as Rabbi Rosner is saying, throughout today, we have probably both of those moments, right? Moments where we deceive our community or our brothers in really hurtful and harmful ways, and also moments where we really stand up very proudly and identify as Jews, even in a world where that feels incredibly scary at this moment. Um, and so the dipping takes on a much greater significance in a really beautiful way. Um, I want to shift focus. So does anyone want to share anything here? Okay, if you ruminate on something and decide you want to share it, you can let me know. So I want to come back to the Karpas
Oh, why am muted?
with a really powerful story, maybe like a small trigger warning here. I think someone is unmuted that is, all right, Rabbi Eliakim, I think it is you. Okay, sorry. It was causing an echo. Oh, did you have a,
I unmuted. I unmuted for a second.
oh, please.
Just a nice tidbit about my older brother. When he was a Bechor, as a firstborn, he was supposed to fast Erev Pesach. He didn't get to a thing to a siyum, and he fasted the entire day. And when we got to Karpas, I said, "Do like the gra, eat a nice big piece of boiled potato. You haven't eaten anything all day." And he was a tzaddik, and he said, "No, I'm going to do it the right way and wait for the little piece and then nuts and so on."
It's a great story because it reminds us that some people might sleep through a siyum and they might fast. It's very uncommon, I would say, for Bechorim to fast these days. But it is true, and then all the more hungry you must be. And I think that the conversation really beautifully shows both sides, right? You could decide to eat a nice big piece of potato, or you could decide that you want to wait and have that matzah be extra tasty. Thank you. So I want to share this piece of the Gemara in Sota. I think that there is something a little bit disturbing about it post October 7th. I first learned it almost 2 years ago. So I think right like the first Pesach after October 7th, a friend of mine shared it in her drasha on Pesach. And I'm part of a chabura of like a small group of women who graduated from Maharat who we share drashot with each other for feedback. And so I read it Erev Yantif and I said, I think this is really traumatizing. And I might not have shared it with you if it was still that year. I think that this is an okay year to do it, but I give space for you saying you don't like it. Okay, let's read it and see what we like or don't like. So the rabbis of the Gemara are talking about a pasuk from Yechezkel, and this pasuk appears in the Magi. And so they tell the story. V'kevan shemakirim behem Mitzrim ba'in lahargan. When the Egyptians would notice, right? We're talking about the super productivity of the Jewish women that they were having so many babies, even when there was a ban on having babies, and the Egyptians would throw them in the Nile, right? So when an Egyptian would notice that a woman was very pregnant or that she had just had a new baby, they would come to kill the babies. What is the miracle that would happen? Nivla'in bekarka, that the babies would be absorbed by the earth, that the earth would somehow hide or protect these children from the Egyptians by literally putting them underground, right? I put this little icon, right? It's like the seed, right? The baby gets completely encapsulated in the earth. Umivi'in shvarin v'charshin agaban. And the Egyptians wouldn't even know they were there. And so they would plow their fields as though there were not small children swallowed up underneath them. Certainly when the Bibas children were still hostages, this felt almost like impossibly sad. I was crying in the middle of my mother's living room while I read it. And so I want to give space for that. I think there's something really disturbing about this. And yet, what happens? After the Egyptians would leave, the babies would emerge and exit the ground like the grass of the field, right? They would bloom, they would blossom. You can imagine the sort of progression. And this is based on this pasuk from Yechezkel that we read. Right? So what does it mean that Hashem causes us to increase even as the growth of the field? It means that the babies who had been hidden in safety under the ground would come up and blossom after the danger had passed. And I think that there is something very beautiful. And whoops. The last source that I wanted to show us is a commentary on this Gemara, which Rabbi Hertz Greenberg writes, and he writes, "V'chadei kor et hanes hazeh." Why do we dip karpas? Why parsley? Why something that grows underground and then bursts through the ground, right? As I think Melissa pointed out, potatoes and onions, you have to dig them out of the ground. It's sort of different. Parsley, it blossoms, sort of the way that this story blossoms, right? And so why do we dip dafka parsley, even if it should be a shahakol, or even if it's just an adornment and not really a food in some people's minds? Because we're remembering the nace, where the yaladim tzomchim min hakarka, where the children sprouted through the ground, ketsemach ha'adama, like plants of the ground. Al kain lochin yerek umevarech alav borei pri ha'adama. Right? That's why we take this green thing and we give it a bracha. Lirmoz hagam shezeh eno me'ikar birchato. Right? Maybe this isn't. We're actually like sort of again turning something on its head. We're saying, listen, this vegetable you think you shouldn't say o borei pri ha'adama on. Actually, that's like kind of the whole point. K'dei livkor hanes kamo shehayerek hazeh yatsa min ha'adama kamo kain hayam mivta'im min ha'adama shenivla shama. Right? We're calling attention. We're saying this is not the appropriate blessing because children do not belong hidden underground. We don't want to live in a world where we have to hide our children in the ground. And so we're going to acknowledge the inappropriateness of what we're doing. And then we're going to do it anyway, because that's remembering the nace of Hashem bringing us out of the ground, of Hashem causing these children to sprout and to grow out of the ground. And so I think as much as I like the idea of framing our dipping, and as much as I like the idea of sort of a more fun and frivolous and filling karpas, I think this to me is like the most powerful ikar of what we're doing at that moment. We are saying that perhaps we have been germinating underground, whether it's between Tu B'Shvat and Pesach, and that's why we plant parsley then, or whether it's like from Purim to Pesach, or through 2.5 years of difficulty, or through moments of anti-Semitism, right, in this moment, we are choosing to make that sort of inappropriate. We're choosing to call it out, to say this is horrible and inappropriate, and yet we are going to thank Hashem for the nace of our ability to blossom, even when we were stuck underground, even when it didn't feel like we were going to be able to come out at all. That now I think it's a little bit safer to think about this midrash. It's like a little bit less emotional labor to say, we do come out of the ground, not always the way we want to or the way that we went in, but that Karpas is about that opportunity for miracles and for growth, for germination during hard times, that allow us to sprout forth in the springtime. So I hope that through one of these approaches, there's something about Karpas that maybe feels elevated or more powerful as a way to kick off your Seder. And I'm going to stop the share so I can see everyone's faces, and I'm going to welcome questions and thoughts and ideas.
Two
New
quick,
minhagim in the
two
meeting.
quick things.
Yeah,
I have, so I totally get your qualms about this story. And as you were, I'm sorry, what was the source of this again?
Masechet Sota. So the Gemara in Masechet Sota.
Are we going to get a copy of your slides?
Yes, I'm happy to share the slides or the Word document from which I built the slideshow.
Great. Okay. So I'm hesitating whether to share or not because I will have some very young children. You know, they could view it as a fun story or not. For those of us who have lived in a more visceral sense through 10/7, I will say that whereas it was probably horrific to try and read through this initially, with all the hostages home and some of them who have emerged miraculously alive from the depths and from the tunnels as if they have sprung from the earth, it's sort of a tribute to them.
I
That
totally agree.
it's still pretty hard though.
Yeah,
I agree.
it's emotional.
Yeah.
There's a very popular book about the Holocaust for kids, and I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's not like the devil at the something about a devil in the title. I'll think of it.
Mm.
Maybe I'll add it with what's it called? Oh, I thought my husband had the answer.
Mm.
But in that book, they tell a story about how the children would hide in the garbage dump.
Mhm.
Like when the Gestapo came around to do rounds in the concentration camps, some of the sort of camp attendees, Gestapo, but like sort of more humane, I don't know how to qualify them, would encourage the kids to hide in the garbage like dumpster. And then
Didn't they
when
hide in the latrines
or maybe in the
sometimes?
latrines, right? And
Yeah.
then they would come out, The Devil's Arithmetic, that's what the book is called. And then
Oh, sure.
they would come out and they would be safe afterwards. So that was the other story that I was thinking of it with this midrash, right? This like idea,
Hmm.
it wasn't quite the same as like the earth swallowing them, but like the yucky, the scary, the dark swallowing them and then
Hmm.
coming out. I think sometimes it feels more emotionally safe to talk about the Holocaust these days than October 7th, which is the only reason I sort of brought that one up. But I agree. I think there's something very sobering, but also like a little bit revolutionary about it, right? Saying like we're turning this thing on its head. We're gonna say this Borei Pri Ha'adama when it's not the real bracha for this food, and we're gonna sprout from the ground, even though that's like not really the way we're supposed to,
Hmm.
right? We usually go in the ground, we don't come out.
I,
Yeah,
I have
Melissa, you had your hand raised.
I
I'm
have
sorry.
a phrase I'd like to ask you about.
Please. Yeah, Tamar.
A phrase comes to my mind when we're talking about being in the depths or buried. And the
Mm,
phrase that jumped into my head was, and I don't know where it comes from, Min hama amakim karati ya.
yeah,
Hmm.
beautiful.
Where is the,
Tehillim.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
That when we are in the depths, we tend to turn to God from the depths. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's one of the Shir Hamelot.
Mhm.
And it is one that we often recite in very hard times, right? So I think, right, the depths, right? The nice thing about the depths or the, right, those like sort of more literary terms is that we can imagine them in lots of ways. I think this idea of like being sprouted in the ground is so evocative because like there's no like, oh, just like they went down, we went down, right? Because thank God for us in Chicago. And even for me in Michigan, where scary things happen today in the Jewish world, right? We don't have to be swallowed by the earth. We had security guards who fought back and subdued quickly, right?
Oh,
So
I saw an email, a statement made by the Orthodox Union decrying what happened, of course, in Michigan and expressing solidarity. And I don't know if that would have happened a number of years ago. So it's an encouraging sign.
yeah, yeah, I think that is a really sobering point. But yes, I'm glad they did. Um, yes, I think that's beautiful to turn it towards a mima makim moment is a really beautiful way of putting it. Melissa, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, it just took me a moment to get the microphone open. So my attention unfortunately had to go in and out a little bit because of being in transit. So I just need to clarify this story. Was it from Talmud or Midrash?
It's from the Gemara, but I would say it's a piece of a Agarata from the Gemara, meaning
Okay.
it is not meant to drive a halachic discussion, but it is a piece of a story, sort of a light
Okay. But
midrash.
it was from Gemara. Thank you.
Yeah, from
I
a
had
sefer.
never heard it before. It was quite dramatic, and I really appreciate how you utilized that to come to this understanding or extra appreciation for using parsley as karpas. I mean, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean it's not me, it's right, it's no, I've lost his name.
Oh, so
Rabbi
I didn't even realize, I guess the in and out attention hurt me there because I thought that was you coming up with that.
No, that would be amazing. Rabbi Hertz Ginsburg.
Oh,
I
thank you.
believe he's actually he's maybe 17th century. Like he's not a contemporary.
So what a beautiful teaching for you to find. Thank you for bringing it to us.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's I had never heard it either, and I think it's very powerful. I agree.
It is, and it does. I have wondered, like, there does, for me, it also seems special, parsley. And I really didn't know why, but I had like a few different thoughts, and that is a very well-rounded way to discuss it. Did you say it was Rabbi Hertz Greenberg?
No, his name is Rabbi Hertz Ginsburg, and he is
Ginsburg, thank
17th
you.
century Polish.
17th century Polish. Thank you so much.
So I guess despite our stories about how the Jews of Poland only had potatoes, it seems at least in the Magen Avraham and Rabbi Ginsburg's time, they did have parsley.
Rabbanit,
Yeah.
for real quick things, I'll make them as quick as possible. Number one, I remember learning that about this 600,000 and the car parsley from a certain
Hmm.
Rebbe in high school when I was in ninth grade.
Said he had
It's in my
very
notes.
narrow.
Number two, can you hear me?
It is a little hard to hear you if you could speak a little
I
bit
don't know
louder.
there's something wrong with my phone.
I know it was on Tuesday too like this.
Yeah. Anyway, number one. Number two, also there's a book by Gerda Klein called
I'll repeat what Rabbi Eliakim is saying.
But she hears him.
Gerda Klein's book is Promise of a New Spring, children's book about the Holocaust. Then I remember, if you can hear me, great. If not, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead. Goethe Klein wrote a book about the promise of a new spring, is what Rabbi Eliakim shared, which I think he had learned this Masechet Tota as a Holocaust story, right? And again, I think the change in the last 2 years is really startling, right? Thank God, between the Holocaust and 2.5 years ago, we didn't have a modern context, right? Thinking about children swallowed into the earth was thinking about the Holocaust. And I think it really has changed in a lot of ways. But yeah.
We're talking about potatoes. I have the weird memory of when I was 5 years old. We were all invited, my parents, my brother, and I had the whole family, the extended family, for Purim Seudah at my aunt's house in the old neighborhood in Chicago, in Humboldt Park.
It's almost 10 too.
And they were ready to start mashing up potatoes to go with the turkey at the Purim Seudah. And my mother grabbed a piece of, who was American, grabbed a piece of potato and started eating raw potato. All the other women that were in the kitchen, my aunt and her cousins, were all together in Auschwitz. And they said, "Oh, how can you eat that? It was the hardest thing for us in the world to do. You have to chew on those things in concentration camp to survive."
Interesting, right? So Rabbi Eliakim is saying that potatoes, for some, especially Holocaust survivors, the idea of eating a raw potato is like this act of desperation or sort of degradation of self. And a cooked potato is like a sign of relative stability and comfort, perhaps. Although, of course, I think it's all relative, right? Because I think many people think of potatoes as like a poor man's food. So that's an
My
even
grandmother refused to allow potatoes on Shabbos because she said it was a weekday food.
Not
And
special.
finally, I
Yes.
heard from this Haredi Rav this year after the hostages were released that he said online, one of the hostages said after he got out of the came back to Israel, who was not officially religious, he once got a pickle from one of the Hamas people. He didn't know anything, but he knew there was a bracha of Borei Minei Mizonot, and he made that bracha on the pickle. And this rabbi said, all our brachas that we make in the world do not compare to that Borei Minei Mizonot that he made on that piece of pickle, because he didn't know better. He said, whatever it did up in the cosmos, it did a lot for Hashem in the cosmos. And just
That's
that
beautiful.
day, we learned there's a Chai Adam that says you can make a Borei Minei Mizonot on anything, not just vegetables. So that's talking about this great hostage who made a Borei Minei Mizonot on a pickle.
That is a beautiful riff on this idea, right? That when one is swallowed in the earth, whatever bracha they say carries so much power and so much weight. Um, Thank you, Harry. It was so nice to see you. If anyone has any last ideas or thoughts, I welcome them.
Thank you. That's my last thought.
Thank you, Tamar. It was so wonderful to see everyone's face here tonight. Next week, gosh, I don't remember who comes first, but they're both amazing. I think Rav Ari is speaking next week on breaking the middle matzah, and the following week, Rav Hodi is talking about Chad Gadya as the greatest of all time, the goat. but let's just make sure I got that right. Yes, Yachatz, breaking down the broken, and then Nirtza, the goat. So I am sure they will both be wonderful. I hope everyone has a beautiful Chag Kasher V'Sameach when it arrives, and that I'd love to hear how your Karpas experience might be different this year, if it is at all.
Thank you so much. This
Amen.
was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank
Beautiful
you.
class. Thank you.
And I hope the what you send us is something we can print out so we can
Yes, I
remember.
will send the Word document to you. That's what I
That'd be
figured
great.
would be better. Okay,
Thank you.
no
This
problem.
was great.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.